Now, the most palpable impact for the Shoals in the aftermath of the Battle of Shiloh is the fact that the Federals are not dislodged from Tennessee. They put their foothold firmly at Pittsburgh Landing. And 4 days later, this man, General Ormsby McKnight Mitchell, basically walks into the city of Huntsville. He meets absolutely no resistance. The Army of the Ohio occupies Huntsville 6 o'clock on the morning of April 11th, 1862. There's a young diarist who is going to school at the Ladies' College in Huntsville. Her name is Priscilla Larkin, the daughter of a very wealthy planter in Jackson County. In her diary for April 11th, she says, "Was aroused from my peaceful slumber before daylight this morning by Martha Ann pulling me, saying, 'Get up, the town is full of Yankees.' Devils are more appropriate names. I do detest the name. They captured the train that was bringing our wounded soldiers from Corinth, but the ladies of the Humane Society have a written permit from that detestable old Mitchell to visit our wounded soldiers. I suppose he thinks he is conferring a great favor by granting the ladies that privilege. They have arrested several of our citizens, parade the streets with as much grandeur as if they were lords of all they surveyed. They are so contemptible." Priscilla Larkin obviously doesn't have a very high opinion of the Yankees that occupied the town of Huntsville that morning. This is the railroad depot at Huntsville that existed at the time. It was completed in 1860 on the Memphis and Charleston Railroad there. So Mitchell and the Army of the Ohio basically proceed to occupy every square foot of land in North Alabama over the next few weeks. They come to Tuscumbia, they come to Florence and the Shoals. There is some question about whether they're supposed to be burning railroad bridges. Now, by this time, I will say, whenever Mitchell and his men get to Florence, they discovered that the Confederates had already burned the railroad bridge. They had burned that sometime in March 1862, after the gunboats first came to Florence. Now, Mitchell and his men really don't have the means to occupy every square foot of land in North Alabama, and they meet with what we might call today insurgency, where rebel guerrilla bands really are just doing anything they can to make life difficult for the Federal Army in North Alabama. They're cutting telegraph wires, they're harassing their supply lines, their supply wagons. This leads to one of the most dastardly events in the Civil War in the Shoals, I would say, May 2nd, 1862. This man, the Russian-born Colonel Ivan Turchin, visits a violent reprisal against the city of Athens, Alabama. Now, the Federal Army had been routed in a really minor skirmish outside of Athens, but they were forced to give up the city. And some accounts at the time say that as the Federal Army was skedaddling out of Athens, the ladies of the town were waving their handkerchiefs, sarcastically saying goodbye to the soldiers. But Mitchell is just enraged by all of this. And so he delivers an impassioned speech at the railroad depot as they go to make reprisal on Athens, basically saying that we're going to scorch the earth and leave no stone unturned, and we're going to punish these rebels in North Alabama. And General Turchin and his men come into town, and they proceed to break into houses, private businesses, busting up furniture, sullying carpets, and committing violent outrages against the citizens there. Turchin actually is going to be court-martialed for his role in these events. And the testimony gathered by the court-martial is very compelling, very telling. And I think I'm going to read an extended passage from Turchin's court-martial to show you what an impact on local people was had at this time. But I have to offer you a content warning here. It gets a little graphic, so if this might disturb you, then I just want you to be aware. A party entered the dwelling of Millie Ann Clayton and opened all the trunks, drawers, and boxes of every description, and taking out the contents thereof, consisted of wearing apparel and bedclothes, destroyed, spoiled, and carried away the same. They also insulted the said Millie Ann Clayton and threatened to shoot her, and then proceeding to the kitchen, they attempted an indecent outrage on the person of her servant girl. The house of J.H. Jones was entered by Colonel Mitsulati of the 24th Illinois Volunteers, who behaved rudely and coarsely to the ladies of the family. He then quartered 2 companies of infantry in the house. About 1 hour after, Captain Edgerton quartered his artillery company in the parlors, and these companies plundered the house of all provisions and clothing they could lay their hands on, and spoiled the furniture and carpets maliciously and without a shadow of reason, spoiling the parlor carpets by cutting bacon on them, and the piano by chopping joints on it with an axe, and the beds by sleeping in them with their muddy boots on. The library of the house was destroyed, and the locks of the bureaus, secretaries, wardrobes, and trunks were all forced and their contents pillaged. The family silver plate was carried off, but some of the pieces have been recovered. Squads of soldiers with force of arms entered the private residence of John F. Malone and forced open all the locks of the doors, broke open all the drawers of the bureaus, the secretary's sideboard, wardrobes, and trunks in the house, rifled through them with their contents, consisting of valuable clothing, silverware, jewelry, etc. And performing these outrages, they used coarse, vulgar, and profane language to the females of the family. These squads came in large numbers and plundered the house thoroughly. A party of this command entered the house of E.S. Irwin and ordered his wife to cook dinner for them. And when she and her servant were so engaged, they made the most indecent and beastly propositions to the latter in the presence of the whole family. And when the girl went away, they followed her in the same manner, notwithstanding her efforts to avoid them. Several soldiers came to the house of Miss Charlotte Hines and committed rape on the person of a colored girl, and then entered the house and plundered it of all the sugar, coffee, preserves, and the like that they could find. Now, these are men behaving, obviously, very badly. There is no military exigency in this. It's really a case of reprisal of men who were really fed up with not having an actual uniformed enemy to fight, and as a reprisal against all of this guerrilla activity in the community, really just let their frustrations out upon the civilians of the city of Athens. The sad part about this in the long run is that claims against Turchin and his men were not allowable by the Southern Claims Commission, because the Southern Claims Commission did not pay for property that was destroyed by depredation. They only paid for property that was officially requisitioned. So most of these people will never see a dime for the property that these soldiers destroyed. Now, as I say, Turchin is court-martialed, but ironically, even though he's found guilty, he's going to be promoted to brigadier general, which renders his sentence moot. This is really a very notable exception to the policy of the Union Army in North Alabama at this time. Under General Don Carlos Buell, the Federal Army maintained a strict policy of what is called conciliation. Now, they believed that if they interfered as little as possible with the daily lives of Southern citizens, that the people would have a change of heart and they would come over to the side of the Union. So General Buell is very hands-off, and as a matter of fact, he is notorious for returning enslaved people to their masters. Enslaved people at this time would go behind federal lines and try to give them bits of intel and information in the hopes that they could just hang out with the federal army and escape bondage. But Buell sends enslaved people back to their so-called masters. Now, the Confederates do actually abandon Corinth, the end of May 1862. It's largely a bloodless affair. It's a lumbering kind of assault on the part of General Halleck. And once the Federals take Corinth, that's been their long-sought target, they divide the army and they look towards their next strategic targets. General Grant is going to be sent towards Vicksburg, Mississippi, which is known as the Gibraltar of the West, the Gibraltar of the Mississippi. It's a major river port on the Mississippi River. That's Grant's target. General Buell with the Army of the Ohio is going to be sent towards Chattanooga. Chattanooga is strategically significant for a number of reasons. It's the gateway into the Confederate heartland in Georgia. And also, it will provide an anchor point for the Loyalists in East Tennessee who are languishing and suffering under Confederate reprisals, hopefully to join the federal standard. So Buell's next target is Chattanooga. And as I said before, Buell is a snail. He really lumbers through. I say Buell begins marching east or crawling east. It takes him 2 months really to get from Corinth to Huntsville. Part of this is that his orders require him to repair the railroad as he marches so that he can haul his own supplies to feed his men, 22,000 of them, and their horses and animals, mules, because he's trying to interfere with Southern society as little as possible. So they think if they can haul all the meat and grain that they need to feed the men, well, then the people will have a change of heart. But there are notable exceptions in that too. One of my favorite stories to tell about this comes from the city of Florence with a man named Samuel Stafford, who owned a dry goods store in downtown Florence. Whenever Buell and his men came to town in the summer of 1862, they went to Mr. Stafford's store and they requisitioned for official army use a number of barrels of alcohol, including peach brandy, blackberry cordial, barrels of whiskey. These were all for official medical use of the army. Mr. Stafford, of course, wants to get a voucher for his property so he can get paid for his barrels of alcohol. So he goes to the headquarters, and the quartermaster says, the man who gives the receipts is still across the Tennessee River. He hasn't crossed the river yet. So Mr. Stafford waits all day for the man to cross the river to give him a receipt. And it's nightfall. The man still hasn't crossed the river. They say, you better come back the next day. Well, the next day, the army starts rolling out of town. And Mr. Stafford is standing on the street corner in front of his store. And he sees the wagons roll by that are laden with the barrels of whiskey from his store. But this is an actual page of his ledger showing the property that Buell's men confiscated from his store in the summer of 1862. Additionally, whenever the Army of the Ohio crosses the Tennessee River at Florence, remember the Confederates had burned the railroad bridge, the captain of engineers, James St. Clair Morton, testified that he was ordered to provide for the crossing of the army over the Tennessee River. So he procured 2 suitable barges and a steamboat, of which, together with the floors, rafters, and joists of the storehouses in Florence, I made a steam ferry bridge. So they literally took apart the warehouses and the storehouses of Florence to use the joists and rafters and floorboards to make a bridge to cross the army over the river. Also at this time, there's the very notorious and infamous arrest of the Reverend Dr. William H. Mitchell, who is the clergyman at the Presbyterian Church in Florence. One Sunday morning, there's a large number of federal officers who were in attendance in church that morning. And Reverend Mitchell, rather pointedly, in his opening prayer, offered a prayer for Jeff Davis and the success of the Confederate arms. And the Union officers didn't take very kindly to that. They let Dr. Mitchell finish his prayer, and then they got up, they left the congregation, and they came back in and arrested him out of the pulpit. And they sent him in custody up to the north, to a prison camp in the north. This story was repeated throughout the northern press, and the Chicago Tribune ran the story under the title, "A Secesh Divine Comes to Grief." But so the point to remember is that although General Buell and the Army of the Ohio are very hands-off with the local population at this time, there are certainly notable instances where people begin to pay very dearly for the presence of the federal army and subsidizing the movement of the federal army, sometimes with the whiskey from their store, sometimes with the literal floorboards of their houses, and sometimes with their persons, sometimes with their personal property. And this is going to be a very strong departure over time. In subsequent movements of the federal army through the Tennessee Valley, commanders like William Tecumseh Sherman are certainly not going to be hands-off with the local population. He is not going to attempt to repair the railroad to feed his men. He's simply just going to turn them loose on the countryside to take whatever they need wherever they can get it. So this is a brief moment in time when the army is really still learning what occupation looks like, how occupation works, and how to feed and move tens of thousands of men and animals through these southern communities. I'll leave you with these depictions from Adolf Metzner, our artist friend who's given us glimpses of life at the Shoals here at this time. This is a view of the city of Florence from the riverbank looking towards the northeast. This is the courthouse, the first Florence courthouse. You can also see the seminary over here, the female seminary. This is what is today known as Wesleyan Hall. At the time, it has a turret, a cupola. I'm not sure when they got rid of that, but all of the contemporary depictions of Wesleyan Hall show it with a turret. But it is most definitely the same building. And here are the pylons of the ruined railroad bridge at Florence. This is looking towards the south side of the river, towards the Sheffield side of the river. You can actually see the bluffs there. Here's a steamboat for scale. This is the first and earliest depiction that I know of that shows the railroad bridge at Florence. These are the same stone pylons that you could see today. This is our railroad bridge depicted here in the summer of 1862 by Adolf Metzner. After Buell leaves Corinth and starts lumbering through the Tennessee Valley on the way to take Chattanooga, the new commander of Confederate forces in the West, Braxton Bragg, has no intention of just letting Buell walk into Chattanooga. So he moves his entire Confederate force by rail from Tupelo to Chattanooga with stunning rapidity. Some accounts say that he makes the journey in 10 days. We're talking about moving approximately 45,000 men and animals, 300 miles in 10 days, while Buell takes months to make the same journey. And when Buell gets to Huntsville, finally, he really loses his nerve. He's not sure what to do. He doesn't want to risk an engagement trying to besiege Chattanooga, and he's worried that Bragg is going to cut him off by invading Middle Tennessee, which ultimately is what Bragg does. He invades Middle Tennessee, eventually making it all the way to Kentucky, practically to the Ohio River. And in response, General Buell withdraws the Army of the Ohio from North Alabama altogether to follow General Bragg back up to Kentucky. And in so doing, gives up virtually all of the territorial gains that the Army of the Ohio made in North Alabama in all of 1862. Now, as we'll see next time, the Federal Army does remain entrenched around Corinth, Mississippi, which is going to be a base of operations for future raids into the Tennessee Valley. Infamous raids, as we'll see in May 1863. But the Tennessee Valley will really find itself as a kind of no man's land, wedged between two massive wings of two competing armies. And we'll start to see how that disintegrates civil society even further as communities are pitched against one another, wedged between two wings of massive armies. Okay, thank you so much.